Monroe down here in Hampton, Virginia. It is a beautiful Sunday morning. It's actually kind of cool being off the water. It's kind of windy, but that's always to be expected when you're down here at Fortress Monroe. But yeah, Fort Monroe is the start of this experiment called America, or the United States of America, I should say. America has always been here. This area would have been inhabited by the Powhatan people. You know, Chief Powhatan and his daughter, one of his several daughters, Pocahontas. This would have been part of their land. And of course, you know, Captain Christopher Newport, Captain John Smith, they would have all been in these waters, sailing up through the Hampton Harbor, which you see before you, and going up to the James River, and eventually founding the settlement of Jamestown around 1607. It was around, you know, a few years later, they came back around 1612. They came back and actually fortified this area. But one of the main things that's focused on here in Hampton, the first African slaves are thought to have arrived in this area off of this fishing wharf. Obviously, this is something recent that you see this pier before you. But back in 1619, the first 20 slaves to America were offloaded here. So the British caught a Portuguese ship. On that ship were 20 slaves from Angola, and then they were brought here, and that's the first documentation that we know of in the United States of Africans being brought to the mainland here. We know where a few of them went, and there are actually some families in Hampton that can trace their roots back to 1619 in those slaves. And matter of fact, last year, 2019, this area, Hampton in particular, really threw on a big celebration in August and September around the 400th anniversary of the first arrival of the Africans. So it's a huge deal around here, and we really do celebrate it. But yeah, when I first moved to Hampton Roads, I actually moved to Hampton. Very beautiful city to me. You know, it has its low points, but it's also a very decent city to live in. But this was the very first park that I came to, and actually it's my first national park. You will find that Fort Monroe is a mixture of state, city, and federal property. So these houses that you see around here, they are privately owned. When this was an army base, this would have been where the officers resided. They get a nice view of the water. But we have a little gazebo here. I'm not sure how old the gazebo is, but it has been here for a very long time. When the Army had celebrations or, you know, bands come and play for the officers or the troops, that would be the area that they would have it. This building before you is the Historic Chamberlain. You know, back in the day, it would have been an area for enlisted soldiers or military to come and use. Right now it is a senior facility, living facility. Very nice. I have been into a couple rooms just working as an EMT. Very nice little apartments in there. So if you are, you know, under their guidelines as far as age, by all means, you know, it's worth looking into if you wanted to retire down here in Hampton. I will caution you, you know, if a hurricane comes, you're right off the water, that this area does flood. But one of my favorite restaurants is down here. It's called the Dead Rise, and it's actually just beyond these buildings here. Very good seafood. You'll find if you come down to Hampton Roads, this place is very much ingrained in seafood. So this is the Dead Rise right here. And you know, I have issues with this ADA compliance because one, my parents, as they get older, the more disabled they become. The way to get up there is by those stairs. Now they do have an elevator, but the last time my parents were down here, the elevator was out. Or they, you know, sometimes I've been told that they've been using it to load their supply trucks, to offload their supply truck. And so if you're disabled, if you're in a wheelchair and you want to come up here, you know, sometimes this elevator isn't working. So after the War of 1812, President James Monroe had determined it was probably best to build a third system of fortifications along the coast of the United States. Hi, little ducks. I'll take a picture of them. Just give me a moment. Okay, I didn't mean to disturb you. Well, I guess technically I did mean to disturb them. But anyway, so what brought that upon was back during the War of 1812, the British was actually able to sail up the Chesapeake Bay through the Hampton Harbor and burn Washington, D.C. down to the ground. So those forts would have been along both coasts. The most well-known that I'm familiar with would be Fort Sumter down in South Carolina. You know, that was the fort that the Confederates ultimately attacked to start the Civil War. And then Fort Alcatraz out there in San Francisco, one of the better known prisons here in the United States of America, probably the world. This used to be the old firehouse. It's turned into a restaurant. And you know, if you're around, you know, they have like little quick things, you know, ice cream, hot dogs, burgers, things like that. This is where I did the Segway tour at as well. But there's the YMCA. If you have a YMCA membership, you can come down here, do your little exercise. Not a whole lot going on. It's a very small building compared to the other YMCAs I've been to. Be careful when walking in the grass. One of my first experiences with Lone Star tick was at Fort Monroe. That's the tick that'll give you a disease called alpha gall, and that is the disease where you're allergic to red meat and you essentially just can't eat anything with or eat or use anything with hooved feet. So National Park Service, this is the national monument. This is actually Fort Monroe National Monument that we're getting ready to enter. Great partnership between the National Park Service and the Fort Monroe Authority, which is the state entity that operates within here. So most of this property, I want to say, is maintained by the Fort Monroe Authority. When you go through the gates here, this is the National Park Service. Now, this is the main gate, and you have a way to walk through, but if you enter while walking on any of the other gates, I highly advise that you push the traffic light to give you the walking signal, because otherwise a car is going to come through on either side, and hopefully they can see you. Hopefully you won't get run over. But if you push the light, that'll keep both sides red so that you can walk through. These gates would have been where the sentries would have been, the guards. And the area that we were walking through is actually a stockade. This is where they kept insubordinate soldiers. I believe they kept some Confederate troops in there as well. Not a whole lot. It's not very big. These bigger structures are where the enlisted soldiers would have been kept. These are not rented out or leased out or anything. They're just empty for right now. Everybody's just trying to figure out what to do with them. Do we preserve them? Do we knock them down and, you know, bring businesses to Hampton Roads? Because some of the city-owned property has businesses on there, and of course they're paying taxes, they're providing services to the region. It's always a question of what to do. This would have been the parade ground. You know, troops would come out here and march and show off their formations and all that good stuff. If you come here, I want to say around September, some reenactors, living historians, they do come here and they do some presentations for the public. But the actual fort itself, after President James Monroe approved the third system of fortification here in the United States, really wasn't complete until about 1834. So that third system order came around 1817, 1819, and Fortress Monroe wasn't complete until about 1834. A young buck by the name of Robert E. Lee came down here in 1831 as a first lieutenant and engineer, and it took him until 1834 to see the completion of Fortress Monroe. So this is the live oak straight ahead that I'm talking about here. If it's not a national champion, I'm sure it's a state champion. It doesn't look healthy. The crown is kind of lacking. It should be really leafed out. Yeah, it looks like it's having some issues. But it's suspected that this tree is over 500 years old. It has a lot of history to tell you. It has seen this area grow up around it. It has seen every hurricane that has come through. Well, not every hurricane, but it has seen 500 years worth of hurricanes come through here. It's a very beautiful tree, and the National Park Service wants to keep it maintained as long as possible. But yeah, while I'm looking and walking around this parade field, one of the most well-known stories about Fort Monroe is the contraband decision. So during the Civil War, American Civil War, 3 slaves, they were over working in Norfolk. Norfolk is only probably about 2 miles away if you travel by boat. 2, maybe 3. 3 slaves were over there working. Their owner had lent them out to the Confederacy in order to build fortifications on the other side of the Hampton Harbor. Those 3 slaves escaped under the cover of night. They found a boat and they rowed over here early in the morning, something like 5, 6 in the morning. They made landfall. They engaged with a Union sentry, and those guards brought them to Major General Benjamin, what's his name? I forget his name. Benjamin Butler. And so Benjamin Butler, he, had them wait for a few hours. He granted them an audience, and of course they were seeking freedom. And so General Butler, being a lawyer prior to entering the army, he said, you know what, I'm not returning these 3 slaves to the slave owner, because he's using them as weapons of war. They're building fortifications for the Confederates, so therefore they are contraband and I am confiscating them. But the word got around the area, and just thousands of slaves came through here and ultimately settled in this parade ground, you know, settled on these grasses here. And, you know, they worked wherever they could, you know, cooking, washing clothes, maintaining the horses. You know, they did what they could to make money. But there were thousands of folks here. Tent City. Okay, so this house in the middle, not all of it, I want to say the left half of this building is Lee's quarters. So Robert E. Lee, future Confederate general, was stationed at Fort Monroe from 1831 to 1834 as a lieutenant of engineers. He had almost complete charge of construction and put the finishing touches on the fort. Lee's first child was born here in 1834. Over here is the Casemate Museum. Like I said, I'm sure it's closed. Looks like there's a park ranger up there. I'm not sure. I know it's closed. But it's kind of odd if you know, they have a cistern up here. That's their well. But if you are able to go on the tops, the ridges of Fort Monroe, there are headstones up there. That's a beautiful magnolia. I'm always engrossed by this magnolia when I walk by. But there are headstones up there. I asked about it, and they said they are the headstones of the soldiers or officers' dogs or pets that passed away. And they're up there. I thought they buried people up there when I first came up here. And, you know, it was kind of a thing where I walked up the stairs. I looked at the first headstone. I brought my behind back down the stairs because I hate messing with cemeteries. All right. But anyway, straight across here, it's sort of midway between Hampton and Norfolk. So you can see the Norfolk Naval Base is over there. And then right here is Fort Wool. So it used to be named after Secretary of War John C. Calhoun, but it was changed during the Civil War to be named under, I want to say his name was Major General John Ellis Wool. I'll put the correct name in there if I got that wrong. But it was named after General Wool. So John C. Calhoun was from South Carolina, very much in support of slavery, a very deep sympathizer of the South. During his time, you know, everything that was leading up to the Civil War, you know, he went through that. And so once the Civil War came, the Union and that fort was maintained under Union hands as well during the entire time, and it was finished off by Robert E. Lee. The federal government, Union sympathizers, you know, people of the North, they did not want that fort being named after someone of the South, so they named it under Major General Wool. If you take the Miss Hampton 2 tour boat, they will take you out there for you to explore. I'm just going to round the corner and you'll see this large white house that the National Parks is currently trying to rehabilitate. And so historic preservation is in progress. This house, or in this house, President Abraham Lincoln stayed during his visit of May 6th through 11th, 1862. It was here that President Lincoln, General Wool, and Commodore Goldsborough planned the attack on Norfolk, Virginia. So a lot of work is going to be done. I don't see any construction material. I don't know when they're going to start. But for right now, you can't go in here or anything like that. You see it's gated off. But maybe one day we'll be able to enter, but you know, it's going to be several years. And I got the walk signal. This is the east gate. And it goes out to the beach. That's very well a beach that you can go and enjoy the water. It's not the Atlantic Ocean, it's the Hampton Harbor connected to the Chesapeake Bay. It's still brackish water. I was going to do some walking tours out here, and I might get back on that because some history that is lost here needs to be told. And the tour that I was going to set up was the story of the Ocean Ranger or Ranger Ocean and Ilavash, Haiti. So I want to say back in 1863 or 1862, as it started dawning on President Lincoln that, you know, if the Union won the war, what was going to happen to newly freed slaves? Because, you know, yeah, while there were some abolitionists in the North, there were still a lot of folks not ready for the integration of black people into American society. So President Lincoln had to give some thought, and, you know, he was presented with an opportunity, quote unquote, by a couple of gentlemen. I don't know their name off the top of my head, I apologize. But they said, hey, we've worked out a deal with the Haitian government. They had purchased acreage, cents on the dollar. I think they purchased it for like 15 cents an acre. And they came up with the plan of resettling slaves, and, you know, they could come and work and integrate into Haitian society and all that good stuff. It was sounding great to President Lincoln and the federal government. Well, come to find out, you know, once that ship left, what was told to President Lincoln was not what happened down in Haiti, and those folks were essentially back in slavery again. It took some months, I want to say probably almost a year, 1864, something like that, for Lincoln to get control of that situation. Ultimately, the Haitian government offered to resettle those folks who had come to Haiti, and they became citizens of Haiti. Now, up here, we have some old cannons. I don't know how long they've been here, but at least World War II, since these have been up. Some very interesting stories. If you do the Hampton History Museum, which is in downtown Hampton, they set up haunted history tours during the Halloween season in October. And one of the things that they told me about this site was there was a German submarine U-boat out in these waters. You know, back during the day, they would turn off the lights. They would tell the residents to turn off the lights so that the U-boats could not navigate and see where the coastline was. But in order to reduce panic, the military decided not to tell the folks along the coast to turn off their lights. And they just kept an eye on the situation. The Navy was here, the Coast Guard was keeping an eye on that U-boat. And ultimately, they followed them down to North Carolina. I want to say around Nags Head, the Outer Banks, somewhere in that area. And they sunk. And when they went down to excavate the bodies and get evidence and collect, you know, intel on the U-boat and all that good stuff, they had found that the German soldiers had purchases from the stores in downtown Hampton. So these people were able to come up for air, offload, integrate with the residents down here, purchase goods, and do whatever, and walk the streets like, normal folks. But anyway, those troops, those German troops, they were given burial rights at the Hampton National Cemetery. Our military gave that service to them under the cover of darkness. We were at war, and I think people would have been upset if they had known about it at the time. But they gave them full military rights to a military burial to those sailors, those German sailors. Like a year ago, a Russian submarine was out here. I don't know why they were here, but they were out here in these waters. But of course, the Navy, Coast Guard, they keep close watch, just in case they want to start some mess. So there's just all kind of history here in Fort Monroe, and I'm sure there are a lot of untold stories down here. But I'm getting ready to walk back to my car. I hope you enjoyed this history hike, and I hope you're taking care of yourselves. And I just wanted to send a shout out to those unsung heroes who are dealing with the coronavirus. Jesus, it's so windy. But I hope you're taking care of yourselves. And like I said, please, take care of yourself, take care of each other. We are in unknown times right now. But I hope you enjoyed this history hike, and I'll catch up with you later. Peace.